There we go, thank you. So, my name's Mike Cox. I'm a board member here at Cedars. And as some of you may know, the beginning of services now, the board comes up and does some announcements just to keep people aware of what's going on. So, today, after the service, a little bit after the service, after we've had time to mingle, in the library for new members or people who are relatively new to Cedars, if you want to meet in the library, which is on the other side over here, just to meet and greet and chat about things, you're welcome to come. Also today at 4 o'clock at Eagle Harbor Congregational Church down in Winslow, be showing a film, Youth versus Government. And if you don't know about this, great opportunity to learn. 21 youth filed a suit against the federal government saying their constitutional rights were abridged because the government had not done enough on climate change, which someone who worked for the federal government for 30 years, I can attest that that was true. So that's today at 4 at Eagle Harbor Church. What else? Oh, fundraising. The fundraising committee has been very busy. And upcoming on May 15th, there's going to be a spring raffle here after the service. There'll be a number of cool things you can put your ticket into, and there'll be a drawing. So May 5th, fundraising. In addition, on June 12th, there'll be a Cedars Marketplace. For those that are not familiar with that, people bring stuff and you go out in the courtyard here and there's a marketplace. You can buy it, and that's all fundraising for Cedars. Also, on Monday, May 16th, for those that might be interested, Autumn Salamak, she's a climate officer for City of Bainbridge Island, will be presenting to us and to Grace on the actions that the city is doing on climate change. But more importantly, it's going to be a time where we can all get together and talk about what we can do individually and as a group to address climate change. So if you want to learn about what the city's doing and then what we can do collectively, that's Monday, May 16th at 7. That will be in the Beacon. Finally, June 5th, all congregational meeting, they'll be here. And then on June 11th, many of you may have known John Peck passed away a couple weeks ago. We'll be having a service here on Saturday, June 11th at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much. And Johanna, take it away.
Good morning. Welcome to Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Johanna Munson, and I am honored to be serving as your worship associate this morning, along with our minister, the Reverend Zachary Vinson. It is a joy to be here again with you in person, and to those who are watching from home or who are watching the service later, welcome to you too. We couldn't hold these services without great support from our volunteers. Many thanks to the sound team, the tech team, and the setup team for transforming this elementary school gymnasium into our sanctuary. Before we move further into our service, let's pause to acknowledge that members of our congregation occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of Coast Salish tribes, the homelands of the Suquamish, Duwamish, Klallam, and Chimicum people were ceded under duress through the Point Elliott and Point No Point treaties. We affirm Indigenous sovereignty, both past and present. This acknowledgement does not substitute for the need to build authentic relationships with modern-day members of these tribes and to learn about their living culture and history. Cedars is committed to being a welcoming and inclusive community. In all the beauty of languages, cultures, and skin tones that come together in your uniqueness, we welcome you. In all the ways you experience and express gender, in the beauty of whom and how you love, we welcome you. With all the religious and ethical traditions that inform your spiritual life, we welcome you. You are invited to join us today and always with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. Now, let us prepare for the service by listening to the prelude. Poem by Zdenko Fidget, performed by Audrey Blair.
Nice to see some faces here that I haven't seen in a little while. And I've said hello to most of you, but I'm glad you're all here today. I'm glad everyone's here today, actually. I want to invite us to take a breath together. Breathing in and out. Letting ourselves settle into this moment, into our presence with one another. As I share these words by Reverend Jen Crow for our call to worship. Love can work its way into improbable and impossible situations. Like water over stone, it has potential to wear down our suffering, create new pathways of possibility, and support life in inhospitable terrain. Love can't fix every situation, but it does have a way of working on us and opening portals to our closed hearts. Love keeps us company, settling in beside the unlikely good or the unlikely bad that comes our way. The house struck by lightning and set afire in the middle of the night. The child lost. The immigration case that goes well or poorly. The lottery ticket in the car accident. The diagnosis and the deliverance from evil. None of it deserved, all of it happening the same. Love cannot fix everything, but can keep us company. It can help us imagine ourselves through the perspectives of others, the ones who won't give up, who whisper through the ages. Let us see what a little love can do. Come, let us worship together. Life happens. I now want to invite us to join together in singing our opening hymn. This is going to be hymn number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Reminder, though, before we sing, folks, while we're singing, we're asking people to wear masks. And so if you have your masks, please put them on. If you need a mask, Kasha has some masks there. Actually, I could use one, Kasha. I forgot mine. And if anyone else needs one, feel free to raise your hand, and we will join in singing.
We'll be singing Enter, Rejoice, and Come In, accompanied by Audrey, whenever you're ready. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your heart to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. One more time. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
That was lively. So much fun to be able to sing together. So I have to say, the poetry of Robert Frost has not played a major role in my life. Of course, I'm familiar with this poem that's referenced on the front of our order of service today. But honestly, poetry itself has not been a go-to source of meaning for me. It's only been within the last 2 to 3 years that I've paid that much attention to poetry at all. And I attribute that to being exposed to more poets these last 2 years, as my usual avenues of inspiration, live music and theater, pretty much disappeared, opportunities to enjoy those. But one thing that has been constant is reading books, both fiction and nonfiction. This has been a lifelong source of inspiration for me. My collection of books from my childhood is still a treasure trove of contentment when I'm in the mood to put aside whatever is on my mind and just disappear altogether into another world. Madeline L'Engle, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, I just feel as if I was actually right there in their worlds when I read their books. When I first read them, I didn't have much awareness of the deeply spiritual nature of those three authors, but I can see now that I am deeply influenced by the themes of transformation inherent in their works. It was not until college, though, that I had my first experience with Buddhism and exposure to Buddhism. It was a quirk of fate that one of my freshman roommates was studying Japanese and had her character cards up all over the room, her kanji cards. I was intrigued, so I took a Japanese literature course my second semester, and that was it. I was completely hooked on the culture, just the whole aesthetic of Japanese culture. I ended up living in Japan for 5 years altogether and continue to develop my spirituality with Buddhism as a strong influence. One of the most impactful Buddhist teachers in my life has been Thich Nhat Hanh, and in particular, this book, No Death, No Fear. I have read it through several times and marked pages that have caught my eye, as you can see. I have several others of his and many other books on spirituality by well-known authors such as Pema Chodron. Would that I had time to read a couple of hours a day. I'm certainly not lacking for material. So as a way to engage with the numerous volumes I treasure, I have taken on the practice of Lectio Divina, or sacred reading, with this book as well as other favorites. So what is Lectio Divina? It's a practice that began in monasteries and was a way for monks to combine reading the scriptures with meditation and prayer in order to better understand the meaning of the words and get closer to God. It literally means divine picking. And I have developed my own style of engaging in this practice. It's actually become part of the mainstream culture. There's even a podcast where they do this with the Harry Potter books. It's there. It's called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. So check it out if you're curious. So this is how I practice. I close my eyes and move my awareness from my logical brain to my heart. I sit in meditation for a few minutes, focusing on my breath and calming my body. Then I get curious and see what question comes up. Usually something will come up pretty quickly. Then I open my eyes, open the book, and point somewhere. I put my finger on the page without looking and read that passage. It may be a passage, it may be just a word. And then I sit with that to see how does that answer my question. It's a fascinating process. I really, really enjoy it. And so I did this in preparation for today's service, and I'd like to share what came up with you. So my heart wanted to ask the question, what am I creating? When I sat and listened, that was the question that came up. And this is what came up. Impermanence makes everything possible. We are often sad and suffer a lot when things change, but change and impermanence have a positive side. Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. Life itself is possible. If a grain of corn is not impermanent, it can never be transformed into a stalk of corn. If your daughter is not impermanent, she cannot grow up to be a woman. Then your grandchildren would never manifest. So instead of complaining about impermanence, we should say, warm welcome and long live impermanence. We should be happy. When we can see the miracle of impermanence, our sadness and suffering will pass. Impermanence. I am creating impermanence. Wow, I did not expect that. And honestly, that element of surprise is part of the fun of doing this. It's often eye-opening and totally unexpected what shows up. Everything I have created is impermanent, from food and flowers that I grow, to my kids who are grown and off on their journeys, to the work I do now. I speak these words, and although they are being recorded, this space is impermanent. It will revert to an elementary school gym in less than an hour. Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. So I dedicate the lighting of our chalice today to recognizing our impermanence and smiling as we face the unknown together in community. Please join me in repeating our affirmation. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because they are our sisters of our one family. To take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
Hello. I have identified 3 volunteers today. I'd ask them to come up and join me for my exercise, Something on My Face. All right. Kasha. Yes.
What is on your face?
I don't have anything on my face. You're being ridiculous.
Archer, you got something kind of right here?
I'm an expert face washer. I think I'd know if I had something on my face. Thank you, Tyler.
Hey, Archer, you got something on your face.
Oh my gosh. I've been trying to get this off my face for so long, but I just can't seem to get it. Could you maybe help me get this off my face?
I can.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, volunteers. All right. Also have something on my hand. I'll get the rest later. So, obviously, I had something on my face. But what was important about that is the responses I gave. When you think about being in community together and what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, which response do you think was the best one? Sometimes when we are building community together, it's important to listen to what other people have to say, even if we might not want to hear it at first. But we do that because it's part of our covenant, our promise to each other, to be open and understanding. There are times when we need to hear news of feedback that causes us discomfort, but in hearing it and responding to it constructively with curiosity and a little humility, we can more easily go about building a beloved community. We can help each other. This is especially true when it comes to feedback about how cultural privilege along race, gender, and gender identity, disabilities, sexual orientation, class, any of those and more, how they impact others. This interactive story, I hope, demonstrates how we can all lean towards kindness and understanding, and maybe when we have something on our face, trust the person who's telling us we have something on our face. Thank you. Oh, and now, life happens. We will be doing a brief reflection with me playing my drum as an interlude. But I have something on my hand.
Please join me in the spirit of prayer as you feel most called, as I share these words by the Reverend M. Barclay. Individualism is destructive. Send greed and selfishness away. That learned refusal to acknowledge your own need for help, let it be gone as well. When possible, counter all impulses towards privatized survival with acts of love, collective and expansive, with caring for others and accepting care. Remember, we need each other. Remember the need of your neighbor, literal and metaphorical. Remember the vulnerable. Remember, we are in this together, even when we don't act like it. People depend on your choices. You depend on the choices of others. This, a sacred and terrible truth woven into our flesh. So let this time be an opening to all the sources of connection we have lost in this era of push down, pushing through, pushing away, pushing the pace. Let all that is soft, all that is slow, all that is gentle, all that is kind, all that is careful be welcome home in each of us. We have such creative power, powerful, generous, and brave capacities within us. We can choose to do things differently. May we choose to do things differently. Amen.
As you know, our faith community is sustained by the generosity of our members and friends. I talked about impermanence, and I know I do this every week, or the worship associate does this every week. It is a permanent part of our congregational need that, yes, we do need funds. And to me, that is so that this work can continue. We have members come and go, but the institution itself has an enduring presence. Your contributions help nourish the spiritual growth of our community through weekly worship and ongoing programs that can cultivate connection, belonging, sharing, and caring. If you are visiting for the first time, please feel free to let the baskets pass you by. You are our guest, and we are happy that you are with us. Will the ushers please come forward to collect the offering?
So, earlier this week, someone reached out to me and asked if they could have a meeting. They've never been to a UU church before and are looking for a place for their family. So I said, yeah, let's meet for coffee. And in the conversation, as everything advanced, the question came up about what scriptures I preach from. I grinned a little bit. I said, well, that's an unusual question in some religious context for me to answer, because I believe, very much like our United Church of Christ siblings, that revelation is not sealed. That whatever it is that created us, God, the Spirit, is still speaking, revealing things to us, teaching us new things. And the person asked, well, can you give an example? I said, well, for me, Robert Frost is Scripture. It wasn't always that way. It wasn't until I was in my first year of college and I was in an English 102 class where we had to read the collected works of Robert Frost that I found myself really falling in love with his poetry and have been ever since. It also helps that the professor who introduced me at this level to Robert Frost became one of my biggest mentors and closest friends after I graduated. And she died this last fall, Lynn, and every time now I read Robert Frost, I still think of her. So there's this connection I share. But that's enough about me and Robert Frost as my personal scripture. Let me talk about Robert Frost himself. As a poet, Robert Frost is most often associated with New England and its pastoral landscapes. Fields, hills, trees, little streams. I think of those covered bridges, that setting. And yet, most people forget that he was actually born and grew up for most of his formative years in San Francisco. It wasn't until years later that he spent a considerable amount of his time in New England. Despite spending his later years in New England, Robert Frost was known for his love of San Francisco still. And despite all those years, he once was quoted saying, "I know San Francisco like my own face. It's where I came from. First place I really knew. You always know where you come from, don't you?" I'm a strong believer that the context in which we live shapes us. Time spent in a city or time spent in the countryside, as if through osmosis, marks us. Each place that I have lived in my own life has left a distinct impression on me. My first apartment, independence. Moving away to college, opportunity. Working on a fishing boat in Alaska, adventure. In each case, I experienced myself moving from one state of being to another. Or, as you might say, from dependence to independence, or as I now would say, interdependence. Recognizing this, I think there are places in Frost's body of work where we can witness the mark that his own environment left on him. One example of this that I have found is in a poem of his titled "Acquainted with the Night." He writes, "I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the farthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over the houses from another street. But not to call me back or say goodbye, and further still at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night." This poem, first I love it, I love the meter, and I think I've mentioned the stood still and stopped the sound of feet part of it is just really entertaining to me. But this poem, the content of it is about someone who is out walking on a city street at night. We're not 100% sure why they are out walking the street, but we can gather that they are longing for something or someone. And we gather that from that line, stood still, stopped the sound of feet. When far away an interrupted cry came over the houses as if from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. There's a longing that someone might call them back or say, hey, I'm sorry, goodbye, I'll see you later. There's this sense of wandering that we get. The urban setting of this poem very much reminds me of San Francisco. The place Frost said that he knew like his own face. It reminds me of San Francisco, specifically from my time spent walking the streets of San Francisco as a chaplain for the San Francisco Night Ministry. I had already grown to love this poem at that point, but as I settled into my role, once I found myself in my nightly routine of walking the Tenderloin, the Mission, and the Castro, I found this poem kept coming to the forefront of my mind. Something about the rhythms of walking at night through a city that Robert Frost knew. It just felt right. It felt palpable, like there was something here that he captured. Place is important. In other of Frost's poems, the New England period, for instance, we can see how his experience in the countryside shaped the content of what he was saying. In the short poem titled The Pasture, which I'm not the hugest fan of, but it works for this point, and it was short enough I could recite the whole thing. But this is a poem that talks about this country life as opposed to the city. He says, I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait and watch the water clear, I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too? I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by the mother. It's so young, it totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too? It's very different than the setting of the city, and yet in this poem we still see this longing for connection. You come too? I'm going out somewhere to do something, to clear a spring or get a calf, and I want you to come too. I think that in the place, the places that Frost finds himself, there's this longing for deep connection to other people that he continues to express. But there's more. Despite many of Frost's poems being rooted in physical place, not all of them are necessarily as such. He also has many poems that take concrete images and concrete language and uses them as a way to explore mental, psychological, spiritual concepts. In a poem titled Assurance, Frost uses the image of a porthole on a ship, a little window on a ship, to help him communicate the feeling of assurance that we all long for. He writes, the danger not an inch outside, behind the porthole's slab of glass, and double ring of fitted brass, I trust feels properly defined. He's describing a scene in which a storm is raging outside of this ship's window, and he's inside hoping that he doesn't go down in the storm, and that feeling of assurance comes from seeing this slab of glass held in the brass rings. It's tentative, it's tenuous. In moments when we assurance assurance in our own lives, it can sometimes feel like we're in the middle of a storm that's raging against the porthole window of our inner being. And we just need someone to remind us that that glass has held, that those brass rings have held. They've endured before, and they can endure this storm too. In another poem where Frost takes an abstract idea and explores it in sort of a concrete situation, He writes, "A voice said, 'Look me in the starts, and tell me truly, men of earth, if all the soul and body scars were not too much to pay for birth.'" We find an example in this poem of what philosophers call dualism. It's present throughout, in this poem, through this use of the consideration of soul and body scars, that we have soul and body. We have, oftentimes you'd say, the immaterial and the material. Noticing this particular distinction is key, I believe, to trying to understand the worldview that Frost puts forth in his poetry. Throughout Frost's body of work, we find countless examples of this sort of dualistic juxtaposition. He once wrote that there are endless things in pairs ordained to everlasting opposition. Endless things in pairs ordained to endless opposition. Things like matter and spirit, body and soul, God and devil, good and evil, heaven and hell, subjective, objective, light and dark. These dueling forces played a central role in Frost's understanding of the world. Or as he put it in his meditation on the destruction of the world, titled Fire and Ice, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and will suffice. I like how he breaks that meter at the end, that he's like, and would suffice. Despite this sort of dualistic, this fire and ice, body and soul way of viewing the world, there are many places in which Frost names the value or the potential of the middle place between two opposing forces. In the poem Assurance that we heard earlier, the assurance comes from a slab of glass and rings of brass positioned between the poem's speaker and the storm that's raging outside. Or how in another poem titled Peril of Hope, Frost positions hope between two opposing points when he writes, "Hope, it's right in there, betwixt and between, the orchard bare and the orchard green. When the boughs are right in flowery burst of pink and white, we fear the worst. For there's not a climb, but at any cost, we'll take that time for night of frost." Kind of reminds me of the offertory music, the sakura, the blossoms. And we have this scene where an apple orchard, it's bursting with its blossoms, and any cold snap could kill them. It would ruin the fruit. And it is in this place between the orchard bare and the orchard green that Frost says hope exists. It's right in there, betwixt and between the orchard bare and the orchard green. When I notice how the midpoint between two points of opposition plays an important role in Frost's poetry, I can't help but feel there's a sense of tension in myself. Which way am I being pulled? There's something here unfolding, something which we're not quite sure which way it's going to unfold. And so in that moment of uncertainty, we hope. We seek assurance. It's in between those wonderful things and those awful things that the middle point we seek out. In his book titled Robert Frost, the Poet and Philosopher, where I adopted my title, Peter J. Stallis writes, "Dualism provides the whole basis of his total but unsystematic philosophical view of reality. This includes Frost's epistemology, so theories of knowledge and how we learn things, his psychology, his logical and analytical methods of reasoning, his emotional bias and choices regarding ideas and events in conflict, his conception of what is true and false, good or evil, ugly or beautiful, In short, Frost's dualism accounts for his view of God, man, and nature. I'd say God, people, and nature, but it's not my quote. Despite his deep adherence to dualism, though, there's another philosophy that Frost also expresses strongly, and that was his educational pedagogy. In 1931, in a talk titled Education by Poetry, Robert Frost expounded on the importance of poetry as he saw it by saying, "Unless you are at home in metaphor, unless you have had your proper poetic education in metaphor, you are not safe anywhere, because you are not at ease with figurative values. You do not know the metaphor in its strength and weakness. You do not know how far you may expect to ride it and where it may break down. You are not safe in science. You are not safe in history." Pretty bold claim. Without metaphor, you're not safe anywhere. This talk was delivered in 1931 at Amherst College and was meant to be an indictment of a trend that had started developing in many colleges and universities. And that was a trend against poetics. I'm not exactly sure what caused it, but apparently at the time, many institutions had started paring back their literature departments, especially poetry, and the ones that remained focused primarily on the classics. Contemporary poetry was seen as something not worth considering, which would have been Frost's poetry. So he had an interest in this. To illustrate this particular pattern, Frost provides the following example in the speech. He writes, "I know whole colleges where all American poetry is barred. Whole colleges. I know whole colleges where all contemporary poetry is barred. I once heard of a minister who turned his daughter, his poetry-writing daughter, out on the streets to earn a living because he said there should be no more books written. God wrote one book, and that was enough." This attitude towards contemporary poetry, I believe, caused Frost to fear that society would lose one of the most powerful tools for understanding, the metaphor. This is what he was communicating, I believe, when he said, "Unless you are at home in the metaphor, you are not safe anywhere." He felt that it was through the use of metaphor, through the use of figurative language, that we are able to probe deeper into the meaning and mysteries of life. And then once unearthing some new insight through insight or wisdom through the use of metaphor or symbolic language, we are able to share it with others. I think one of the main functions that Robert Frost poetry accomplished is to act as a tool for people to harness the power of figurative language, of metaphor and simile, and use this language to communicate philosophic understandings to one another. It's not that we all need to be poets and writing poetry, but we need this language. We need ways of talking about abstract ideas that allow us to communicate. Many times over the past few years since our last president, I have found myself in that place where I have felt torn between two opposing forces and really could use that assurance. Times when it felt like my optimism for what could be was held in tension with my pessimism of what also could be. The state of our political system, issues of climate change, the increasing wealth gap, I could go on. These are all issues that pull at me, that pull at each of us. I want to be hopeful. I want to lean into that optimism and muster as much of it as I can. But when you feel that pessimism pulling too, it can be hard to lean one way when you're being pulled this way too. In those places where I feel torn between two radically opposing forces, what I have learned from Robert Frost is that it is in the middle place, the in-between place, where hope and assurance are found. It is in these threshold spaces, these liminal spaces, that we are given a choice between right and wrong. To the glory of life. At this time, I would like to invite us to redon our singing regalia, our masks, and join together as we prepare to sing hymn number 368, Now Let Us Sing.
All right, this is a fun one. Cedar's classic, as far as I know it. Please rise as you are willing and able, and low voices. Low voices in the congregation. We are going to start this off. All right, so I'm going to count us in 1, 2, 3, and then low voices will start. Oh, if I could be on the right page. Oh. There we go. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Now let us sing. Now let us sing. Sing, sing, sing. Be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within. Now let us sing. Sing, now let us sing. Sing, lift up your voice, be not afraid. Let us sing to the power of the faith within. Now let us sing. Sing, sing, now let us sing. Sing, 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 lift up your voice, be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the faith. Lift up your voice, be not afraid, and let us sing to the jar of the joy within. Oh my goodness, that was lovely. Thank you all.
Sorry, you sat down. You got to stand up again. Let's recite our extinguishing words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. Good. We extinguish this flame. The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our service has ended, but our service to one another and the world begins anew. As we go forth and we find ourselves pulled between those two opposing points, may we remember the power in that middle space. May it be so.